Masechet Beisah, daf 34. A few really interesting and a little bit complex cases, but definitely fascinating. So the last thing we left off on was creating a fire on Yom Tov is prohibited. The Talmud says it's because you are creating something new on Yom Tov. So creation, 6 days and rest of Shabbat, but also Yom Tov. Shabbat for sure you can't make a fire. So that's an interesting reason. Most Rishonim say that mitzvah is only asur midrabanan. So that is important because sometimes there are people that don't know this law or don't realize how to apply it, and they may start a fire and cook. So can you eat there? Well, if it's only in a isur midrabanan, although they should not do that, nevertheless the food is kosher. However, if they violate a deoraita, then you would not be able to eat there at all. So it's important to know whether it's deoraita or drabanan has practical effect. All right. Now, the Mishnah mentioned that one may not whiten, besides making a new fire, you can't melabenin and tarfa'im, whiten a tile, heating the tile up a lot, and then you take it out of the fire, it retains that heat for a while, and then you cook something on top of the tile. The question is, my kaved, what's the problem? What are you doing? You're not making anything. You're just heating up something, and it's going to be for food. So what's the problem? Oh, the prohibition only is if it's new tiles, newly created tiles. If it was one that you used many times before, then you're right, you would be able to use it. And what's the problem with a new tile? Because they're not tested. And you never know when you make this kind of tile and then you heat it up a lot, it might break. And therefore, you don't know if it's going to break or not because you didn't test it yet. If it does break, then it turns out you heated something up for no reason of eating of ochel nefesh, and then you will have retroactively violated Yom Tov. And so that's the problem. Now, if it turns out that it tests out well and it's okay, it's usable, then you didn't violate Yom Tov. So according to this answer, it's just a 50-50. You may end up violating Yom Tov. But another second reason is the second reason is because it hardens it. Even after you bake it and make it, when you heat it up a lot the first time, that makes it hard, which is so therefore actually it's not yet a finished vessel until you heat it up. So by heating it up that first time, you're actually completing the vessel. So that is a definite melacha that you're doing no matter what. Okay, so those are the two reasons, either because it's untested or because you have to harden it. And now we're going to see a practical difference between these two reasons in a different application. So tenan hatam derasa o sheterafa bakotel o sheresaseta behema mumefarseket v'shahata me'at la'et v'shahata keshera. Okay, so now we're going to Mishnah in Chulin, which lists different terefot. These 18 different items that if an animal or bird has these blemishes, then it will not live out, and it can't live out a year. Then it's called terefa and cannot be eaten. Within these, there is a category of a bird that was trampled or thrown against a wall, or animal crushed it, and so now it's crushed. And for this, it's not 12 months, but rather 24 hours. If it dies within 24 hours of being crushed, that's terefa, because that's it. It died from that. If it lives 24 hours, then it made it. It's all right. Okay, so then it's kosher. That's not called terefa. Now, on that, Amar Rabbi Elazar bar Yanai Mishum Rabbi Elazar ben Antigenos Siricha bedika. Even though this bird lived 24 hours and therefore is not a terefa because it was crushed, nevertheless, you have to check it for all the other terefot because it still might have something else that's internal that didn't kill it within 24 hours, but may not allow it to live 12 months. So you got to check it. Okay, that is the law regarding a bird. Now, question. What about taking a bird like this that was crushed and lived and cooking it on Yom Tov? Now, in general, you can go take a random bird and that you designated and kill it on Yom Tov, even though you're not sure if it's a terefa or not. How come you're allowed? The reason is because we assume that any bird that you took and you did shechita, we assume that it's kosher and it doesn't have any terefa. We check it anyway to make sure, but on the biblical level, you can follow that chazakah. In this case, however, since it underwent a trauma, maybe that chazakah doesn't apply anymore. So mi mechazikinan reuta b'yom tov o lo. So do we assume that, listen, since it was crushed, there is a likelihood that it has some other terefa, even though it lived 24 hours, and therefore I should not be allowed to kill it on Yom Tov, because then I'll find the terefa. More than likely I'll find another terefa, and ends up that I did shechita for no reason, not for food, and violated Yom Tov. Or do I say, no, it's like any other bird, and I can go ahead and assume that it's kosher anyway? That was the question. Now that is why we're bringing all this in, and we compared that case of the bird to our case of the tile. Amar le tanena en melabenin et alfaim lislot bahen vavinan ba mai ka'aved v'amar Rabba bar Chana amar Rabbi Yochanan hacha bid'afim chadashim askinan mipnei shesarich lebadkan. And so his response was, oh, we learned this regarding those tiles, that you're not allowed to make them hot. And we said, why can't you make these tiles hot and then cook on them? And the Yochanan's answer was that they are new tiles and they're untested. And then because they're untested, we're not sure if it's going to make it, and it might break. And then retroactively, you will have violated Yom Tov. And that's the same as our case, that because this animal, this bird was crushed, and so therefore we don't know if it's healthy or not, we should not kill it on Yom Tov, the same way you don't heat up the tile on Yom Tov. And so that's his answer. So you see how brilliant this is to compare two completely different areas of halacha, but underlying both is the same principle. So that's really cool. But he responds back, yeah, but we have the other reason, and we follow the other reason of the tile, that you're making them hard. And according to that reason, you're definitely hardening it when you heat it up for the first time, and that's the problem. But if it's just a safek and it may break and may not break, if it was just for that, then there wouldn't be a problem. And according to this bird, even though it was crushed and there is more likelihood that it has a different terefa, nevertheless you can do it on Yom Tov because it's not for sure. All right, so that's a super interesting comparison. And now we're just going to bring a list of a few baraitot that relate to this general question of a new oven. Tanya, אחד מביא את האור, ואחד מביא את העשים, ואחד שופט את הקדרה, ואחד מביא את המים, ואחד נותן בתוכו תבלין, ואחד מגיס, כולן חייבים. Okay, but I have a cool case of you have 5 different people. They're all participating in cooking. So one brings a fire, one brings the wood, one puts an empty pot on the stove, another one brings the water, another one adds the spices, someone else stirs the pot. They're all chayavin. Okay, because they all contributed, all did something. All right. Now, but we have another braita. This is only the last person is chayav and no one else. So how can we reconcile this? The first one, there's talking about a case where you put the fire first. If the first guy brings a fire, now the person that adds wood is chayav. The person that adds the water is chayav. The person that mixes, the person that, right? Each person we understand because there's a fire there already. If, however, the fire comes at the end, then nobody else did anything wrong. Okay, I just put some wood down here. I just put a pot down here, right? I put some water. I didn't do anything. Only the last guy who lights the fire, he's causing it to cook. Good, so that all makes sense. Now, bishla makuluhu ka'avdi ma'aseh. So the original baita with the 5 people, we understand everybody is doing something wrong. Bringing the fire, no good. You're burning more wood. You're right. Is all on Shabbat. Right. Adding water, adding spices, and mixing. Those are all bad. But the person who brings the empty pot, what is he doing? So what? There's a fire there. I put an empty pot on the fire. I'm not cooking on Shabbat. I'm not doing anything. Why can't I just put an empty pot on the fire? Oh, must be that's talking about a new pot. And the new pot, you have the same problem that if it's new, then it's the same as these tiles that are new. And for whatever reason you say there, it'll be the same here. The pot, is it gonna withstand the heat? And for sure, you are heating it up and hardening it, and therefore making a new vessel. So that's a fun application of this law, and it solves the riddle of the case of the 5 people. Okay, now just the standalone Tosefta, Tenor Banan, Tanur Bechidam Hadashim. Okay, here explicitly, before we were just assuming, oh, see, it must be a new one. But in fact, this is a category in Tana Edik Halacha. So a new oven or stove, so halacha 1 is that you can move it around, even though you didn't use it yet, and so therefore you can't actually use it for the first time on Yom Tov. Nevertheless, it's not mukseh because you can use it as a closet, and so I can move it from one place to the other and store things in the oven. Aval en sachin. I don't recommend doing this today because then you might turn on the oven and forget that you hid something in it. Aval en sachin otam shemen ve'en tashin otam bematlit. What you cannot do is put oil on the oven or put a rag on it. This would be done at the beginning to make it nice and shiny and new. So this is part of the processing of the oven. And you also cannot cool it with liquid when you heat it up, because that is going to make it ready to use. Yeah, so this would be similar to the tile, that you can't heat it up because that hardens it, and often after you heat it up, then you put cold water on it to get it ready to harden it. So so far it's the same, but there we have one more clause. But on Yom Tov, if you have bread in it and you want to cook in it, and it's too hot and it'll burn, and then you're putting the water on it so that it'll be the right temperature, then it's okay. So that's interesting, that if the food is on it, then it's permitted. So this is not in contradiction to the tiles, because the tiles didn't have any food on it. You heat it up to very hot just by itself with nothing, and only then you put the food on it. And here, since the food is in it already, so the cooling is not to finish it off, but rather to make it the right temperature for cooking the food that is already there. Now, Tenora Banan, Molgin et Harosh ve'Taraglaim u'Mahabebin otan ba'or. We're going to see a whole bunch of cases, but we'll eventually get to one that's similar to ours. So the head and feet of an animal that was slaughtered, they would usually dip it in boiling water to remove the hairs, and that's okay. You can do it in that way. But you cannot use clay, earth, lime. That's also, they would put it on, and that would, I guess, burn away the hairs. You can't do that because that's like a professional way that you want people process skin. So that's not allowed. And you also can't shear an animal with scissors, for sure not when it's alive, and not even after you skin it. And now we're transferring that same law to vegetables, that you cannot use these special shears, because this is a professional way of cleaning off the vegetables. But you can prepare these 2 vegetables that need to be cooked a lot and have a lot of work. This might be referring to artichokes, and my wife makes artichokes every week. It's a family favorite, but it is a lot of work, I can tell you from watching her. So nevertheless, even though it's a lot of work on Yom Tov, but they're really good, so it's permitted. So one is allowed to bake in a large oven. Purni is like from English furnace, and also Arabic fidin, right? Okay, good. So a nice Semitic root that made it into English somehow. So that's okay. And even though it's large, but things bake well when it's in a large oven. And you can also put hot water in this kind of thermos, even though maybe you'll think that I'm putting it in a thermos, that's going to last till tomorrow, and I'm preparing for tomorrow. No, it's still okay. But you just cannot use a new oven, because it may break the first time you use it. Because they're made out of clay, and that when it gets very hot the first time, you don't know if it can withstand the heat. Okay, I hope the return policy is good. Tenora banan en nofchin b'mapuach. So similar law here. You cannot blow a fire with bellows. So that's a professional way of making a fire to a weekday activity. But you can use a tube. That's an unusual way. So even though you're allowed to grow a fire and you can make it hotter because you need it for cooking, nevertheless, not in a weekday manner. We saw this quoted before, that you cannot fix a skewer or sharpen it, because then you are preparing a vessel. You can't break a reed to make a skewer to salt fish on it. Again, making a vessel. Something you can do is, if you want to crack open a nut, so you put it inside a rag and then you bang it on the rag, and you don't have to worry that the rag may tear. I mean, it may tear, but that you don't want it to tear. So therefore, your purpose is to help open the nut. So that is all permitted. All right, and that brings us to the next Mishnah, which is going to combine a few different areas of halakha. So we'll give the background as it comes up. Ve'od amar Rabbi Eliezer. All these, what this has in common before is these are all in the name of Rabbi Eliezer ben Hurkenas. He was a very important sage. He's the one involved in the Avon Abachnai story, who was excommunicated. But he was known as a Shamuti from Bet Shammai. So a lot of his halachot represent this older strand of halakha that he insisted on. So he was very, very brilliant, but sometimes because he held on to those old halachot, he came into conflict with the other sages. But everyone acknowledges that he was far and above a great a sage who remembered many things that no one else knew. Okay, Omed Adam al Hamukseh Erev Shabbat B'Shevi'it. Okay, a mukseh here we're talking about literally means something that is set aside for storage. Here we're talking about, let's say you put fruit out to dry. And so it's almost done. I mean, if it's totally done, then, we assume you're going to use it. It's not yet done in a state where some people wouldn't eat it, but some people would. And you like it. You want to eat it, even though they're not completely dry. Now Shabbat is coming. Usually, if you put something out to dry, you say, "I'm not going to use it. It's up on the roof or in the courtyard." So therefore, it would be mukseh. But let's say I do want to use it, but I want to leave it out there. I don't want to bring it in yet, so it has another few hours to sit and to dry. So Rabbi Eliezer says I can stand next to it on Friday and say, "I'm going to eat these figs here tomorrow," and that will make it not mukseh. And the Chachamim omerim ad sheirshom v'yomar mikan ve'ad kan. Chachamim are more stringent, and they say you have to specify these here, this section, this 2 square foot of figs. These I'm going to eat. You can't just make a general, I'm going to eat all of these. Okay, good. So really, this has to do with the laws of mukseh and what you have to do to prepare. Similar to, remember we said about a bird, right? A bird in the hand. Bet Shammai was machmir, and he said you have to hold it in your hand and shake it. Bet Hillel says no. But here Rabbi Eliezer is lenient. Okay, so that's one part of it. However, they have another word here, b'shevi'it. Why are we adding that? Okay, so what's the law of Shavuot? On Shavuot, which is actually this year is a Shavuot year, when you have to, a Shavuot year is special because since all the fruit that you have is for everyone, everyone's allowed to come take it, including you, the owner. So you take some of it, and that's okay, and you dry it out. But because it's available to anyone and not yours, you don't have to bring Teruman Maaser. No Teruman Maaser on the Shavuot year, so it has a leniency. So that is helpful in this case, because since it's Erev Shabbat, now usually when you take the fruit and put it up on the roof, you don't take Teruman Maaser yet, because it's not prepared, it's not finished. Another rule of Maaser is you only have to bring Maaser when you finish processing it, when it's ready to eat. And this is not ready to eat. I mean, you could eat it raw, but you have in mind that you're going to dry it out. So therefore, you put it up there and you didn't take Maaser. So you have non-Maaser, and it's also not fully ready yet. But you want to eat it on Shabbat. but you can't take maaser on Shabbat. So that's why it has to be a Shivi'it year. If it was a non-Shivi'it year, then you went up there and say, oh, I want to eat this tomorrow. But tomorrow you can't take maaser, and then that'll be a problem. So therefore, the Mishnah says, all right, let's remove this maaser problem by saying it's a Shivi'it year, and then I go up and I say I want to eat it, although it's not quite ready, and that turns it in from mukseh to prepared. Okay, so the Gemara is going to really discuss like why is it complicating this case so much by bringing in this maaser case. It must be teaching us something new, not only about the laws of mukseh that I have to designate it, but also something new about Shivi'it law. And so that's what we're going to get into. So we begin by quoting two Mishnayot that have to do with Shivi'it, and that'll give us the background we need for the following discussion. Tanan hatam. Tinokot shetamnu te'enim me'erev Shabbat v'shachechu ve'lo iseru lemotzei Shabbat lo yichelu ela im ken iseru. So you have some kids and they went and took some figs and they put them aside, they hid them on Friday, and they said, you know what, we think we're going to eat them on Shabbat. And they didn't take maaser. They're kids. I mean, the truth is it would be for adults also, but we're saying it's for kids so that they don't have to. Now, even though they are kids, nevertheless, because they thought about eating them, that now makes them required to take maaser. So when something is out in the field and not brought into the courtyard or your house, you're allowed to eat it as a snack. Derech aray. Even though you didn't take maaser yet, you can have a snack. However, once you bring it into your courtyard or into your house, and it's also finished in its preparation, then the obligation to take maaser kicks in. The exception to that is Shabbat. On Shabbat, there's no snacking. We assume that everything you eat on Shabbat is keva because you have nice big meals, right? And you're not just taking something on the go while you're on the way to work because you're not doing that on Shabbat. So when you designate someone to be for a Shabbat, to eat on Shabbat, it's for a meal, and that makes it keva. So these kids that took these figs and put them on the side from Erev Shabbat, by doing that, whether they knew it or not, they were making it ready that you have to take maaser. So now, let's say they forgot about them, and they didn't eat them on Shabbat, and now Mosei Shabbat comes. Do you say, oh, now it's not Shabbat anymore? Can we snack on them? No. Since you already designated them for Shabbat, and the obligation to take maaser already kicked in, now you cannot. Now you have to take maaser after Shabbat. Lo yichlu ela im ken iseru. Okay, so that's one law that, although we, in general, just to summarize, in general, for something to be required maaser, it has to be finished processing, and you have to bring it into your courtyard or your house. However, Shabbat can override at least one of those. We'll see if it overrides both. Shabbat overrides that even if it's not in your house, and it's out in the field, nevertheless, you can't snack on it. Okay. Now, next question, next Mishnah. If I bring the figs into my courtyard, but I don't bring them in to eat, I bring them to the courtyard to dry out, that's not considered as if I brought them into the courtyard. They're not ready. I mean, they're in the courtyard, but they're not ready to process. And therefore, you're allowed to eat them in a temporary way. So you see that you need both things, to bring them into a courtyard and also that they are finished the processing. Okay, so that's what we learned. And now we're ready for our question that we're going to deal with till the end of the daf. Shabbat, מהו שתקבע מוקצה למעשר בדבר שלא נגמרה מלאכתו. If I have figs that are not ripe yet, and so they're not finished. Now, and then I say, I'm going to eat them on Shabbat, right? By saying I'm going to eat them on Shabbat, can that cause them to be obligated to maaser? In other words, we saw above that even if it's not in my courtyard, if I'm going to eat it for designated for Shabbat, then it overrides the courtyard because now it's a keva, and I can't eat something that's keva. However, you might say maybe if it's not ready yet to eat, it's not processed yet, then maybe it doesn't matter, and I could still eat it in a temporary way on Shabbat or not. Does Shabbat make it ready even for this purpose, ready to eat? and make it as if it's finished processing. That's our question. Here's the two sides. Or do we apply that since we have to call Shabbat a delight, and therefore we don't have casual meals, we have only nice big meals on Shabbat. So therefore, even though they're not ripe, because I said I'm going to eat it on Shabbat, therefore it becomes processed and requires maaser. Or do we say the opposite, that if it's finished processing already, then if I say I'm going to eat it on Shabbat, it becomes required maaser even if it's out in the field. But if it's not ready to eat yet, then Shabbat does not make it obligated to bring maaser. That is our question, and here we're going to answer it. Amar le, Rav Nachman says, Shabbat kovat ben b'dvar shenigmar melachto, ben b'dvar shelo nigmar melachto. Okay, he doesn't give any reason. He just says, I know this is the law. Yes, saying I'm going to eat this on Shabbat, that even if it's an unripe fig or not dried out fig, nevertheless, that is considered, it's finished, and now you cannot eat it unless you give maaser. Not on Shabbat, and then not even after Shabbat, if you said, I'm going to eat it on Shabbat. Amar le, Shabbat u'miyad chaser u'ma chaser ena kovat ela b'davar shenigmar melachto. Af Shabbat lo tikva ela b'davar shenigmar melachto. Okay, so now Rav says back, you didn't give any reason. Here, I'm going to give you an analogy. Shabbat should be similar to a courtyard, right? Both of them, you have to either bring it into the courtyard or say I'm going to eat it on Shabbat, and that makes it something that you're that is in your house, and then you're going to eat, and then you're going to eat it. Then you can't have it as a achilat aray. So I could make this analogy, just like your courtyard. It doesn't designate it as requiring maaser unless it's finished processing. We saw that in the second Mishnah above, that if you bring figs into your courtyard to dry out, nevertheless, you can snack on them, even though it's in your courtyard, because it's not finished processing. So we could say the same thing for Shabbat. That Shabbat is the same thing. Even if I say I'm going to eat this on Shabbat, but if it's not ready to eat yet, then I could still snack on it. And Shabbat doesn't help for that, just like the courtyard doesn't change that status. So that makes a lot of sense. So Rav Nachman, what are you going to say to that? לימוד ערוך הוא בידינו, שהשבת קובעת בין בדבר שנגמר מלאכתו, בין בדבר שלא נגמר מלאכתו. He says, we have an established tradition about this, that Shabbat does in fact make something required to bring maaser, even if it's not finished processing and not ready to eat. So he doesn't respond to the reasoning, he just says that's the tradition. Okay, good. Now a support for Rav Nachman's opinion that yes, Shabbat is powerful enough to make it as if it's complete. And he brings a proof from our Mishnah. Okay, now we understand why we went through all this. So our Mishnah said, you can take this, go up to the roof or to the courtyard where your figs are drying, and you say, listen, I'm planning to eat this tomorrow on Shabbat, and that would be during a Shavuot year when maaser does not apply. The only reason why it's permitted to do so is because it's a Shavuot year, and they don't have to bring maaser. But if it was a non-Shavuot year, when maaser does apply, then it would be prohibited to eat those on Shabbat. My ta'ama, la mishum de Shabbat kav'a. So why not? Why would it be prohibited? See, it must be because I designated them for Shabbat. So even though they are not completely dried out and ready, because I said I'm going to eat them on Shabbat, that makes them as if they were dried out and all ready. And then the requirement for maaser kicks in, and I can't bring them out. I can't take maaser on Shabbat itself. And you see, we have a proof from here, from the fact that the Mishnah said this law only applies in Shavuot year when there is no maaser. That's the only time I could eat it. And a different year, it would not be allowed because Shabbat makes it designated to require maaser even when it's unripe. Okay, that's a brilliant application. But we say no, not necessarily. La shane hatam kevan damar mikan ani ochel lemachar kavale ilave. No, maybe it's not Shabbat that makes it designated, but rather the explicit designation that you said, I am going to eat these. By saying that I want to eat these figs, even though they are not completely dried, you are saying the process is complete for me because I like them that way. And so therefore, anytime, right, even if it was during a weekday, if I say these are ready to eat, I am ready to eat them, then the maaser would kick in. And it's not because specifically it's a Shabbat law. Okay, fine. There could be Yachi Ma'iri Shabbat. All right, then why are you bringing this? Why are you making this case on Shabbat anyway? If the whole point of the Mishnah was only to teach me that to designate something, I have to go stand next to it and say, so then just talk about something else. Talk about birds, that I have to designate the birds. Why are you bringing in this complicated case if it's not even relevant for the laws of Shabbat as they relate to maaser, since Shabbat is not, Shabbat's not changing its status, it's my verbal designation. Afilu b'chol nameh. Okay, hakamash malan. The final answer is it is teaching us something new. The tebel muchan hu esel Shabbat shim aval v'tikeno metukan. So it's teaching us that tebel, something I didn't take maaser from. I might have thought that since if I have tebel, since I'm not allowed to take maaser on Shabbat, therefore it's also mukseh on the whole Shabbat because I can't use it. So this teaches us that no, if someone would violate Shabbat and take Teruman Maaser on Shabbat, even though he wasn't supposed to do that, nevertheless, once he did it, it's not mukseh, right? And so I can have it, I can designate it. And that's what we see from this Mishnah, from the fact that it talked about a case where it is Shevi'it. That means if it was a non-Shevi'it year, then the only problem would be that you didn't take Maaser. And it doesn't say that it would be a problem of Mukseh, right? So the only problem is that you take Maaser, not a problem of Mukseh. That teaches that Tevel does not have a problem of Mukseh, which means someone else did it, then you could eat it. And so we come full circle to the first halakha that we started with, that if someone makes a fire on Shabbat, on Yom Tov, when they are cooking, even though they're not allowed to do that, if they did it already and you're a guest in their house, then you would still be allowed to eat it. Baruch Adonai L'olam. Amen ve'amen.